some great guests on our live show. Let me remind everybody, leap years today is February 29th, okay? Supposed to tell everybody that. And we always want to make sure we do that. With us on our live line, none other than our great person, Attorney Brian Kloss, neutral arbitrator, mediator, and America's Heroes Group advisory board member. Counselor, how are you?
I am great, Cliff. Greetings from the Southwest. We are sitting here with Jen Oliva, and we are very close to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. So if you hear any loud noises while we're talking, it's the A-10s going off.
Wow. Where are you? Where's the Air Force Base?
Tucson.
Tucson. And the professor is with you.
Yes, she is.
Jennifer,
We're sitting here in the office. She was kind enough to come in, and as you see from her background...
Oh, my goodness. Woo!
Yeah.
Her background is unbelievable. Jennifer D. Oliva. Professor, thank you so much. She's a professor at Law Seton Hall University School of Law, Newark Center for Health and Pharmaceutical Law and Policy. But as the counselor mentioned, Brian mentioned, when you look at her background, it's easier to say what she hasn't done than what she has done. Oh, my. How are you, Professor? How you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real honor and privilege.
Oh, listen, we are so pleased to have you. In reading about your background and all the things that you have done and continue to do, Professor, let me say, gotta say this: she's United States Army veteran, and of course admitted to the bar in Delaware, California, the District of Columbia, West Virginia. Also admitted to numerous United States district and appellate courts, including United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims and the United States Supreme Court. What is obvious when I look at your background, all the things that you have done and continue to do, Professor, in courting Harvard Law School and the whole. If I kept talking about what you do, we wouldn't be able to say anything. So tell me, and Brian, help me with it. What do we need for Jennifer to say?
Well, one of the things that you'll find in her bio that's particularly interesting. I mean, she's a smarty pants. No doubt
yes,
about it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
West Point, and while she was at West Point, she got voted a Rose and Truman Scholar. I mean, an Oxford Master, Georgetown Law School, but brings the experience of a vet that helps inform all the work she did. One of the most interesting things I thought she did from our perspective today is she ran a legal clinic at the University of West Virginia Law School. And we all know that West Virginia has certain challenges. Mm-hmm. And the stuff she saw there, I believe, informs her work now. She's consulting on some National Institutes of Health projects. She's working on the intersection of medicine, public health policy, and legal policy. And that's what I brought her on for, because, she's not just an academic, not that there's anything wrong with that, but she's not sitting around in office. She's been out there, both as a vet and both simply driving around her pickup truck in rural West Virginia, which is kind of a redundant term, and getting people into legal aid. And that's what I thought we might want to talk with her about, some of those challenges and some of the things we can talk about for your rural listeners, and some of this insight Jen provides.
I would love that. Jennifer, Professor, would you go right ahead and tell us about that, please?
Yeah, so when I got to West Virginia University at the law school had a sort of very nascent, small outreach program to veterans, and I really wanted to build that out. And so we started inviting folks to come into the clinic and talk with students so that we could make sure that they were getting the benefits that they were entitled to for their service. And I was telling Brian earlier, one of the challenges that was immediately apparent to me was because there had not been services or much outreach in the state into these rural populations, and because these individual veterans in West Virginia had maybe a contact or two with VA, and it had been a bad contact. It had not been helpful. We had to get past a really huge trust issue on the front end. So that was my big challenge, and Brian jokes around, but that's when I got into my white Ford F-150 and decided to drive out into these rural hollers in the 55 counties in West Virginia and talk to people on the ground. And you have to make them believe that you know what you're doing, and that they can trust you. And you have to win a couple cases, so you can then get those veterans to turn around and talk to their friends. And by the time I finished there, we had more than 50 active cases going, and the clinic was extremely successful. So it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my entire career.
That is so interesting. And Professor, you were a cadet at United States Military Academy, correct?
Yes, I was far less successful at that than I was in representing veterans of West Virginia. But yeah, I did squeak out of there by a nose. Yes.
What did you do when you were? What was your MOS? What did you do when you were in the service?
Well, it's interesting. I was a military police officer, and
wow, an MP.
That's right. I was an MP, so I was very popular with the other soldiers, as I'm sure you can imagine, well loved. But that job really is what sort of incentivized me to go into health law, because we were often, a lot of folks coming back from conflicts, PTSD, self-medicating, and, the policing function is not well equipped to handle the complex issues that these folks had and developed because of the stressful environments that we were sending them into, and the losses and the pain and suffering, physical and mental, that they were experiencing. So I thought, when I get done with this gig, I'm really going to look at healthcare and health law, because I think we're trying to pawn too much of this stuff off to police who don't have the sort of training, ability, resources, or function to handle these complex issues.
Wow. We're always pleased to have, of course, Brian with us. And the professor, our call-in number here at America's Heroes Group is 312-374-8130. 312-374-8130. The places you have been, the professorships you have held, it's amazing you've been able to do all of that, and you're still doing it. What's your situation now, Professor?
Well, right now I am at Seton University in Newark, New Jersey. I was, as you mentioned, lucky to be in West Virginia for the first 3 years of my career. And I spent a lot of time practicing before that. But one of the real motivations for me to go and take an academic job was the freedom to be able to do this pro bono work for veterans. And one of the things I want your listeners to know is that an old rule that's on the books prevents veterans from having viable legal representation or paid for legal representation at the initial benefit stage of the proceedings. And I've written an article about this because it's really tragic, but Congress in 1853 passed a statute that said veterans, you can get a lawyer, but you can't pay them more than $5. And the reason that the Civil War statute was passed is folks thought lawyers are to be trusted. They'll steal from the veteran's claims. They'll take a huge percent, take 33% of whatever the veteran gets. And they're very concerned about this. Well, folks lobbied in 1865 at the close of the Civil War. They doubled that amount to $10. And from 1865 until modern times, that statute stayed on the books at $10. So as I'm sure you can imagine, it's very difficult to hire a competent lawyer to represent you in a VA claim at the initial stage for $10. So you've got to do some of this stuff, or at least kickstart some of this stuff with folks who are willing to do it pro bono. So if a university wants to pay me a salary and to teach some students and says that the rest of your time you can spend trying to help these veterans out, that's a job I'm going to take.
This is really something. And also, Professor, there's so much you've done and continue to do. You were appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Then you were subsequently appointed Deputy State Solicitor of the state of Delaware by then Attorney General Bo Biden. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
I bring you topical guest clips.
Oh, that's something, Brian. Yeah. Well, it's just tremendous. So what? Tell to both of you, because Brian is with us all the time, Jennifer. What do we need to be looking at now with the things that are going on relative to our military?
Well, if I'm going to jump in for just a second and then ask Jen to opine on this, but access to justice in rural communities, as I've talked about many times on your show, and your listeners might be a little sick of hearing about, it's always been rough, but it's in crisis mode now. If you are living outside of a major metropolitan area, I think the legal term is that we use in the law, and you'll forgive me for using Latin, Cliff, is you're screwed. So the work that Jen is doing on this intersection, if we look at medicine, public health policy, and law, I mean, Jen's doing work on opioid addiction. I mean, there's not, I dare say there's not a listener out there that does not know somebody whose family has been affected by addiction.
Exactly.
So where that's going, particularly in rural communities, is insight that I'd like to hear from Jen. So I'll throw it back to Jen.
Yeah, please, Jennifer.
Yeah, Cliff, thank you for letting me speak to this, because I do think it's important to point it out. There's a great book that was written by a couple of scholars a few years ago called Casualties of War. And they point out something really simple by doing a whole bunch of hard math and crunching numbers in their book. What they point out is that the folks who are more likely to serve, and then more likely to serve in the risky jobs, the front line, the tough infantry, those sorts of jobs, and then, of course, more likely to be injured or have sort of an emotional or physical disability leading to service, are folks from poor zip codes. And most of those zip codes are in one of two places, certain parts of certain urban areas like the city of Chicago, and then the rest of them are filled out by the rural landscape of the United States of America. So certain neighborhoods in certain urban cities, and then predominantly rural after that. I thought that was very interesting, because it's sort of, to Ryan's point, we keep putting people, so then those folks were poorly resourced from the beginning. That's why they were likely to try to leave their home communities to make a better life for themselves and get training. We put them in the most difficult, most dangerous situation. Perhaps they're better off, perhaps they're worse off from a health perspective at the end of their service. And then they go back to a place that, again, was poorly resourced, where there's not a lot of access to either health care or justice. And it really bothers me that we can prove this empirically. This is not Oliva's opinion. Okay, it's not Klaus's opinion. And it really bothers me that there's not more focus on this. It sort of seems like we keep punching down the same people who keep stepping up for the country. So that's the sort of cycle that, build on what Brian said, that I think it's important for the listeners to be aware of.
Amazing. I tell you, what you have done and continue to do, Professor, Counselor, whatever, is just it's amazing. Brian, give us an end to this, would you please?
Well, Cliff, I'm really appreciative that we have brains like Jen addressing these issues. And as much as we joke maybe about professors, and I mentioned in my comments, professor, she's not just sitting in the office writing articles. She was out there working. But I'm glad she is in the office writing articles and speaking to decision makers and informing policy decisions. Because, you and I have talked about this. Jen raises an important point, Cliff.
Right.
Urban America and rural America send their kids off to war at a higher percentage than any other parts of our society.
Counselor, thank you so much, Brian. You're great, and we'll be talking back to the professor soon.